Well, good morning. It is a joy to be able to be with you here this morning. I really want to thank your pastor, Pastor Stephen, for this opportunity to share with you today. And I count it an honor and privilege. Your facilities are gorgeous. I had been in here before, prior to the flood, and but I did not see this particular building after the flood. I understand that it was just totally devastated. I did see some of the work in progress back months ago, and my heart beats with you. I sympathize with you. I grew up across the river, and in fact, I was thinking about when we were singing that song, "Because He Lives," there's the phrase that says, "and then one day I'll cross that river." Well, actually, that was this morning I crossed the river. That's where I live now. I grew up there. And as a kid, fishing in the Amite River, I would have never guessed that one day that river that brought us so much joy and fun would pretty much destroy everything that my wife and I owned. And so I know that with many of you, and of course with this church family, many of you can identify with that. I appreciate the introduction and the kind words that Michael shared, and sharing with you a little bit of my credentials. By the way, my wife and I, we in next month we'll be married 33 years. We have 3 children, grown. One, my son and his wife, they live in Sweden, and his wife just found out that she is with child. And then I have another daughter, my second child, a daughter. She and her husband have 2 children, one who's gone to be with the Lord and one who's 1 year old, and they live next door to us, which is pretty awesome. In fact, it's very awesome that we get to spend a lot of time. Then I have another daughter who's finishing her degree in civil engineering, and so we're real proud of them, and but we're glad to be here. But anyway, as far as credentials, I'm mindful of the fact that sometimes people may abuse their credentials, or maybe take them to a place where they feel like they have more authority than they really do. And I'm reminded of the story I heard about this young man. He was an agent for the Federal Bureau of Land Management. And one day there was this old farmer who was out by the road, and he was working on this cattle gap and fixing some fences by the gate. And so there was this agent, and he was still fresh, wet behind the ears, but he was young. And this official truck pulls up, and this guy hops out, and he was just strutting as he was walking. Nice truck, and his pants were starched, and he looked, really good. And he said to the farmer, he says, I need to get to the back of your property to look at something. And the farmer's like, "Oh, no, you can't go back there." And the young man, the young agent, he says, "You see this badge right here? This badge tells me, this badge says that I can go anywhere I want to go." And the farmer's like, "Well, I'm just saying you ought not go." He said, "That's enough. I'm going back there." Farmer's like, "Suit yourself." So young guy, he goes and he begins to walk back to the back of the property. So the farmer's just like, okay, and he goes back to working on the fence pliers, whatever. So a few minutes later, he hears this shouting. He hears, "Ah!" And he looks up, and there's this agent, this young man, who's at a dead run, and he's just running like crazy. And the farmer looks up and sees that right behind this agent, just kind of nipping at his heels, is this big old bull. This bull is chasing him. He didn't know there was a mean bull in the back of the pasture. And so now this bull is chasing him, and this guy's just running for his life. And so he's like, help me. You got to do something. And so the farmer shouts to him, show him your badge. Show him your credentials. And so I don't want to take advantage of anything that's been done before or since or, serving in other churches. I'm just glad to be here with you this morning. This morning, what I feel led to share with you, and I'm not going to say that God told me this. I'm very leery of saying God told me that, but I feel led to share with you this message, a very simple message. Fear not. Fear not. Very simple message. Now, you may say, well, if you're a student of the Bible, you say, now, when we talk about the subject of fear, that you may say, no, wait a minute. Doesn't the Bible say that we are to fear, or at least to fear him? And if that's your question, the answer would be absolutely it does. Let me give you a few examples. Deuteronomy 13:4 says this, you shall follow the Lord your God and fear him. In this particular instance, fear is a good thing. Psalm 89:7. In the council of the holy ones, God is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround him. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. This is the second from the last verse of Ecclesiastes. He had been giving a lot of wisdom, and so he's landing the plane, so to speak. He's drawing it, he's in the net, he's bringing the conclusion. And so he says in this very next to last verse of Ecclesiastes, he sums it up like this. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the duty of all mankind. Fear God, keep his commandments. So we see that the Bible does indeed say that there are times that fear is a good thing. Well, a person says, well, what about some times when it says fear is not appropriate? Well, what about times whenever fear is a bad thing for us to do or to have? 2 Timothy 1:7. Paul says, for God has not given us the spirit of fear. It's a bad thing. He's not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love. In fact, perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. So it seems as though that there are times whenever the Bible says that fear is a good thing, and yet other times where fear is a bad thing. Now, is there a contradiction here? Absolutely not. And let me explain to you what I mean. There was an old college professor I had who used to say on a regular basis, he said that words don't have meaning, they have usage. They don't have meaning, they have usage. And he would use this example with the word plug. He says, now if I were to ask you to define a plug, what is a plug? He said, we get different answers. A lot of people would think about an electrical plug. You plug into a socket. Yeah, that is a plug. If you're a fisherman, you might use an artificial bait, a lure that's sometimes called a fishing plug. Then he talked about other examples of people who, like in advertising, where you put in a plug for someone or put in a plug for a politician. You put in a good word for them. Years ago, I don't know if they said they used to have sell a piece of tobacco called a plug of tobacco, or or maybe an old horse or mule that was called an old plug. So whenever you say, what does plug mean? Well, it depends on how it's used. And in that same way, this word fear is like that, because when we're talking about fear, what is fear? Well, it depends on how it's used. So whenever we see in the Old Testament, in fact, the word fear that's used in the Old Testament, that word is used 330 times. And it can mean a wide variety of things. It can mean everything from terror to what is considered awesome. So the word that we look at in the Old Testament, it's a very complicated word. For most of our intents and purposes, whenever we read the word fear in the Old Testament in reference to God, it is a reverential fear. It's not the kind of fear that we're talking about that brings terror, that we're afraid, that there is alarm, that there is panic. So we're taught to fear God, and we're taught to have that reverence where we submit ourselves, we acknowledge that He is superior to us. So whenever we're talking about God, there is that reverential fear. That is a good thing. Fear is a good thing in that sense. But whenever we're talking about other things, apart from that, fear is not a good thing. We're going to look at an example this morning out of, if you have your Bibles, if you'd like to look with me, to the book of 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 6. Now, you have probably read this story before, and maybe you've forgotten where it was located in the Bible. But it's a pretty interesting story of an account of what happened related to a prophet by the name of Elisha. Now, you may remember that there was a prophet by the name of Elijah, but this is his successor, Elisha. And Elisha was representing God to the people and representing the people to God. And one of the things that he was doing, he would instruct the king of what God's plan was, but also would give him vital information. Now, there was a king of Syria, a guy by the name of Ben-Hadad, that he was making war and wanting to war with the Israelites. And so he was king of Syria, and so he had come into the land of Israel, and he was wanting to defeat the Israelite army. But what was happening is that God was allowing Elisha in on the plans of the king. So the king, there were times that the king of Syria, he would plan this ambush. He was going to trap the Israelite army, and God would allow Elisha to know about it, and Elisha would get word to the king of Israel, don't go there because the Syrians will be waiting for you. After this happened a few times, the king of Syria is like, who is it that's giving him this information? Who's telling him about our plans? Is it one of us? We have somebody in our circle here? And they said, oh, no, it's nobody within our circle. It's a man of God that's giving away the plan. And so the king said, well, we need to find who that man is. Find out where he is. We're going to pay him a visit. The guy comes back and says, King, we found out who he is. We found out where he is. He's living in a place, he's staying in a place called Dothan. And so the king says, all right, saddle up your horses, let's ride. He sent a group of people to hunt down Elisha, this man of God, in the city of Dothan. And so we'll pick up in verse 15. When the servant of the man of God, which was Elisha, so when Elisha's servant, he rose up. Oh, let me back up just a second. As I said, the king of Syria, who sent this group, they found out where Elisha was, and they surrounded the place. They surrounded where Elisha was. Next morning, Elisha's servant wakes up. He goes outside. He rose early in the morning. This is verse 15. And he went out, and behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city, surrounding them. And the servant said, "Alas, my master." Now, another way of alas, that basically means, "Oh no, master, what shall we do?" And so Elisha said to him, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And I don't know if you've ever had somebody say, we're going to be doing such and such. And when they say we, they actually mean you. Now, since my wife was not able to come this morning, so I'll say, a lot of times she says, we need to repaint this bedroom. She doesn't mean we, she means me. And I want to say, do you have a mouse in your pocket? You're talking about we in the plural. I'm just thinking about what this servant is thinking is Elisha says, "Fear not, fear not. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And I'm thinking about what this servant and him looking around me like, I don't know who you're talking about, this those who are with us. I'm not seeing anything. And so we can see, obviously, what he is, his reality is what he can see. I mean, or what he can pick up on with his five senses. It's like, okay, you're telling me not to have fear, but what I'm seeing is this gigantic army that's out there up against me and you. The odds don't look good. And so a natural emotion that the servant felt was fear. And so Elisha says, don't fear. Don't fear. And the reason you don't have to fear is because there's more fighting with us than with them. And so picking up in verse 17, so then Elisha prayed and said, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." Because even though he was seeing, he didn't really see. And so the Lord opened up his eyes. He opened the eyes of the young man, and he really saw. He really saw. He saw the whole picture. And behold, what he saw was this, that the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around. And so it says in verse 18, and when the Syrians, they came down against him, Elijah prayed, "God, would you strike these people blind where they can't see?" That happened, and Elisha said, "Okay, you're in the wrong place, and let me show you where you need to be," and brings them in Samaria. And then when they opened their eyes, they were like really in the heart of the lion's den, so to speak. The Israelite king said, "Should we kill these people?" Said, "No, you need to feed them, send them home." And so what ended up happening was it was such an incredible thing that the king, after that incident, the king of Syria, it said he didn't come and war against them again. But what we see here in this particular situation is a situation that the events, the situation, the details of the circumstance, they're different, but we have all felt this emotion of fear. Life is messy. And it's just not messy for some people. I mean, life is messy for everyone at some point. You may ask, Kevin, what in the world do you mean? What I mean is, there are no perfect families. Each family will have to deal with heartache. Maybe it's a medical situation. Maybe there's a broken relationship or divorce. Maybe there's financial problems. Maybe it's a flood comes and destroys. I mean, every family at some point goes through difficult times, and life is messy. And it's in those times that often it is a very natural feeling and emotion to have fear. To have fear. Now, in this particular situation, we see that there are obviously some points that could be brought out that we sometimes feel like the enemy has surrounded us. And maybe you're in a situation like that right now, where you look around you and you say, the odds don't look good here. There are some things that could cause you to lose heart and say, you know what? To use the slang term, it ain't looking good because of what's going on in my life, in my family, my job, prospects, whatever. The enemy may not be the commander of the Syrian army, Ben-Hadad. Might just be the devil. It might be things that we perceive around us. But we need to remember that God is greater than any enemy. We could look and see, even in this situation, what appeared to this young man, the servant, as a threat. It's like, we're in big trouble here. I'm like, you think that's an army? God's about to show you what an army looks like. And he opened up his eyes. And then also the fact that, we see in this situation where God was providing in such a way that these people were able to see firsthand how God would deliver them. How God would deliver them. Now, each one of these things I mentioned we could spend a lot of time on. Obviously, 3 things that Elijah did that were really good, that would be good for us to do, especially in times where we feel this fear. Elisha, he prayed. He had faith in what God was going to do, and then he was obedient into what God showed him to do. We could talk about those, but really what I'd like to kind of conclude with is this. That whenever there is fear in our hearts and our lives, as we read, as Paul says, God has not given us a spirit of fear. So whenever we do have fear, we have to wonder, well, where's that coming from? It's not coming from the Lord. But there are things that we do sometimes that are motivated out of fear. Things that maybe we do out of a fear of criticism. Now, I can tell you that I have been guilty of this. And in the 32 years that I pastored churches, I can tell you, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but there are things that I did out of fear of criticism. There were some late night runs to the hospital. I was at home with my family, getting settled in. I'd hear about somebody, and while I knew I could pray for them right then, I knew it's like, if I don't get up and go to the hospital, I'll never hear the end of it. I knew. And so my motivation was not just out of pastoral love. I mean, I did love them, but the reason what got me into that car going to the hospital, it was I was afraid of how I would be criticized. And even, that, and I know that is not unique to pastors or staff. I know that there are probably times when you feel like, well, you know what? I'm going to do this, or I'll volunteer for this, or I'll agree to serve on this, because I don't want people calling me a slacker, or I don't want, somehow we are afraid, and sometimes we're afraid of people just downright criticizing us. We don't like that. And so sometimes we might do the right thing, but with the wrong motivation, because we don't want people being critical. And I can tell you, as my life has changed, where I'm at in life and doing things, I know that there's something that I still think about from time to time. Will I do this or that? Will I do this because I don't want to be criticized, or will I not do that because I don't want to be criticized? So I don't know that it's something that any of us get away from totally. There is that thing that causes us to be sometimes too mindful of what other people think or say. And then sometimes we're motivated out of fear of disapproval. We say, fear not. That's the word I want to share with you this morning. Fear not. But sometimes we do fear, and part of that fear comes because we don't want to disappoint people. And we're like, now you are disapproval. Now, I've had the opportunity, my wife and I, we raised 3 children, and now have the opportunity to spend a lot of time with my grandson, and he's just as sweet as could be and precious. And we haven't really, he's about a year old, just turned a year old, and there's a few things, that we've had to, as he's standing up and pulling on stuff, we had to say, no. But you can imagine, well, this may be hard to imagine, but if you were to imagine some cruel parent or grandparent that communicated to a child, if you don't do exactly like I want to, then I'm going to withdraw myself. I'm not going to like you if you don't do exactly this. You would say, well, no reasonable person only a monster would withhold their love if their child or grandchild didn't do exactly just right. But why is it that we sometimes think that our relationship with God is based upon our performance? That sometimes we have a fear of disapproval from God. It's like, well, if I don't, if I miss one Sunday, or if I don't, if I somehow don't do just right all of the time, then God is going to withdraw his love from me. And the last thing I want is God's disapproval. And so I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to act in this way because I don't want him pulling back his love from me. Is that really the kind of God we have? Do we really have to fear that God is going to withdraw his love from us? The Father who gave his only begotten Son that we could be saved. Jesus Christ going to the cross. But yet sometimes we as Christians, and I guess this is a message for believers, because we know that fear is a real thing, and that sometimes we do what we do not out of love, but out of fear. And then sometimes there is a fear of never enough. And what I mean by that is feeling like, we believe as Baptists, once saved, always saved. We're saved by our faith. We're not saved through our good works. No, we don't. Our good works don't save us. But sometimes we act as if our good works keep us in God's good graces. And so there is that feeling that whatever we're doing for God, that it's never enough. That it's never enough. I don't know, people take tests differently. There are some people that the way they take a test, they go in, they write everything they know, well, I'll say like on a essay questions or whatever. And it's like, okay, I've written everything I know. Okay, that's all I can do. They hand it in, walk out. I used to be envious of people like that. I was like, man, they're pretty confident. Because even though I finished all the questions, I was like, okay, there's still time. I better go back through. And maybe there's something more I can add. And somehow that I'm working till the teacher says it's time to turn in the test. Thinking there's always something else I could do to make this a little bit better. You know, and I have to say that as a Christian, I've kind of felt like that in my walk with the Lord, always feeling it was never good enough. Now, someone would say, well, Kevin, do you think your good works save you? I say, oh, no, I know my good works don't save me. But yet there was that fear that there's more I could do. I'd never really done enough. It's like, okay, well, you know, you're doing these things. Yeah, well, I'm doing those things, but there's probably something else I need to be doing for God. And then I had to, you know, I've had to, over years, kind of work through, why is that? Why is it that I never felt like I was doing enough for God? I feared that there was more that I could do. And maybe there might be somebody here today that maybe you're kind of that way. That you do a lot of good things for the Lord. You volunteer for a lot of things. You work really hard. And yet, still you wonder, is there more I could do? Am I doing enough for God? Well, you know, that's between you and the Lord. But what I'm saying to you this morning is, as a rule of thumb for God's people, yes, we should have that reverential fear of God. But so many of the things that we experience fear over, I'll say that there are so many things that are out there. The word I have to say to you today is fear not. Fear not. There are many things that we have fear. We sometimes can be paralyzed by the fear of the future. And what it does is it robs us of joy for today. And that's really no way to live. That's not the abundant life Jesus has for us. So I don't know in what way this may affect you and at what point that you can say, yeah, I identify with that. But I want to leave you with this word today, to fear not. Fear not the things that, you know, that perfect love casts out all fear. God does not want you to live in your life with fear and dread and terror, worried about what might happen, or worried about if you're doing enough for God, or worrying about if you are performing well enough for God. And that my prayer for you, you remember, Elisha prayed for his servant, and this was Elisha's prayer. O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. And my prayer for you and myself as well today, my prayer is the same, that God would open up our eyes, that we could see the way that things really are, not the way we perceive them to be, but that God would help us to see his perspective on life and about our service for him. So I'd like to pray for you right now and myself, and would you bow with me at this time? Heavenly Father, we know that you have not given us a spirit of fear. And yet, Lord, sometimes we succumb to that emotion. Sometimes that we look around and it seems like there is a mighty army surrounding us, or it looks like the situation is so challenging that there are so many obstacles, that there are so many roadblocks that we get discouraged and we experience fear. God, help us to trust you. God, help us to keep in mind that if you are for us, who can be against us? And God, I'm not sure who needs to hear this message today, but maybe somebody who's just been burdened with fear, been struggling with that. And God, help us, Lord, to see the way things really are. And as we do, Lord, that our faith would rise, your faith in you would rise up within us. And God, that we would seek the victory. Lord, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you most of all for your Son, Jesus Christ. We place our faith and trust in him today. In his name we pray. Amen. At this time, I'll invite Michael to come.
Stand with us and let's sing. Come just as you are, hear the Spirit call. Come just as you are, come and see, come receive, come and live forever. Come just as you are, hear the Spirit call. Come just as you are, come receive Christ the King. Come and live forever. Come just as you are, come receive Christ the King, come and live